Greetings everybody, and peace be upon those who follow guidance. I hope that all of you are having a wonderful day. In today's video, we are going to be discussing the concept of fasting within the Quran, as we are nearing the beginning of the month of Ramadan. We are going to be answering some of the questions that pertain to fasting as presented in the Quran, where in particular we will be focusing on verses 183 to 187 of chapter 2. According to the traditional understanding, fasting the month of Ramadan is one of the 5 pillars of Islam. However, this is an understanding that the Quran does not recognize, so I will not be dealing with it. I will only be focusing on the Quran throughout this discussion. So, without further ado, let us get started with the video. As already said, the verses that we are going to be discussing in this video are verses 183 to 187 of chapter 2, surat al-Baqarah. We will be going through them verse by verse, and then sum up everything in the end in a more structured format. The verses state as follows: O people of the faith, prescribed upon you is the fast, just as it was prescribed upon those who were before you, in hope that you might perchance attain self-discipline. Thus, according to this verse, we are told that fasting, or the act to fast, was prescribed by God upon the followers of the Quran, just as it was prescribed upon those who were before, in hope that they might perchance attain self-discipline. So, we can understand from this that fasting was indeed a prescription, a kitab, which was also given to those who were before the revelation of the Quran. In the Quran, there are 2 renditions of the English word, fast, or fasting, which are, Siyaam and Psalm. In this chapter, and in these verses that we are going to be discussing, the rendition that appears is, Siyaam, whereas the word, Psalm only occurs once in the entire Quran, in chapter 19, verse 26, wherein Mary the mother of Jesus is informed to say if she meets any person, I have indeed vowed a fast to the all-pervading Supreme Being, and as such, I shall not be speaking to any humankind on this day. Thus, according to this verse, Psalm was an act of abstaining from something. In this case, she was abstaining from speaking to any of the townsfolk. It is not entirely clear whether there is a difference in the 2 renditions of the word, but it might be possible that Psalm was a term which referred to the abstinence from speech practiced by those who were before, such as the children of Israel, and in extension the Jews and the Christians, whereas Siyaam was the abstinence from the consumption of food and/or water, and also from sexual relations, as we will see in the following verses. However, this is merely a hypothesis, and not something conclusive, so take it with a grain of salt. Anyway, continuing in the discussion of the verses, we are told that the Siyaam was prescribed upon the people of the faith, meaning those who adhere to the Quran, as a way for them to attain self-discipline, the Quranic term of which is taqwa. This is a very prevalent term in the Quran, and I have made many videos wherein I explain this term, so I will not be going into many details about it in this video. In short, it refers to the ability of being aware of the harmful effects of a certain phenomenon and restraining oneself from it. Taqwa requires a conscientious willpower, which is what separates us from the animals. It is the capacity to restrain our impulses and resist temptations. In a nutshell, it means to do what is right and good, even when our impulses might tempt us to what is wrong. It is a discipline that has to be learned, and fasting or abstinence from pleasure just happens to be one of the ways that can strengthen our willpower, both in body and in spirit or mind. Fasting is a way by which we can let our desires know that they do not and cannot control us, and it takes training which involves self-control, willpower, and perseverance. Once we have attained self-discipline, it would enable us to build on our self-esteem, better our relationships and interpersonal skills, and help regulate our abuse of the pleasures of life. However, though fasting can build someone's self-discipline, it can be extremely difficult to maintain for a very long time for many people, which is why in the next verse, God says, for days that are numbered. But whoever among you happens to be sick or on a journey, then a number of other days. And incumbent upon the ones who are incapacitated by it, is the ransom of feeding a poor person. So whoever considers something to be good and dedicates it, then it is good for him, but that you should observe the fast would be better for you, if only you knew. Thus, according to this verse, the Siyaam was prescribed upon the adherents of the Quran for numbered days, meaning a limited number of days. So, it is not a practice that God has required of people for most of their days. However, since not everybody will be in healthy conditions to maintain the fast, God grants exemption to those who may happen to be sick or on a journey. It is not specified what qualifies as sickness, whether it is mental or physical sickness, so we will assume that the verse implies whatever sickness one may be suffering from. Those who are on a journey are exempt from the fast, since journeying typically requires a lot of strength and nourishment, so making such a person fast would be impractical. It is similarly not specified what kind of journey, but we can assume that it would have to be a kind of journey where one is in need of nourishment to complete the journey, or a journey which differs greatly in terms of time difference, where one would have to be forced to fast more than they can fast. For example, if I am traveling to the United States, and my flight is going to be 8 to 10 hours of flight alone, from a country which is ahead of the United States with 6 hours. If I were to take my flight at the beginning of my fast in the morning from my country, then by the time I get to the US, I would have fasted for 8 to 10 hours, yet in the US, I would have to break my fast 6 hours ahead of the time which I would have broken my fast in my country. Meaning that I would be fasting for more hours. Thus, this would be impractical, so the Quran grants an alleviation to those who are traveling. Hence why I would say, that if there is time difference between the countries, then one would be exempt from the fast. If there is no time difference, and depending on the method used to travel, then one would have to decide that on whether there would be the need for nourishment or not. If there is need for nourishment during the journey, as well as rest, then one would be exempted from fasting. According to the verse, if one cannot fast due to these reasons, then they may fast on other days. This is showed in the statement of the verse which reads, "Whoever among you happens to be sick or on a journey, then a number of other days." Thus, this also implies that fasting is not an obligation, and one does not have to fast if they cannot. We will return to this statement in the next verse. The verse then continues by stating, "And incumbent upon the ones who are incapacitated by it, is the ransom of feeding a needy person." Meaning, that if someone is healthy and not on a journey, and they can fast, but they struggle with it and they find it cumbersome, then upon them is the ransom of feeding a poor person. So, if someone has difficulty fasting, and when they fast, it renders them incapable of doing other essential duties, such as work at their job, then they may feed a poor person. Once again, we are not told how much one would have to feed, or how many days one would have to feed. God has left it to the individual to judge, as everyone has their own means and capabilities. If one can buy a meal for a poor person with $1, then they may do so. If they want to spend more, then they may also do so. That may seem incomprehensible to some people, however, what one can buy for $1 in one's country might not be the same in another country. So, if one lives in the US for example, and they cannot fast, but they do not have the means to feed a poor person within their home country due to the high prices of food, then they can send whatever they can of their money to a trusted person in one of the poorer countries, where even a single dollar can buy enough food to feed a person for a day. One should not be ashamed of their capabilities to spend, as the verse says, "So whoever considers something to be good and dedicates it, then it is good for him." Though one may have difficulty fasting, God does still encourage the person to fast according to this verse. But this does not mean that one would be sinful if they didn't, rather because of what fasting does to an individual personally, as they are missing out on the benefits that fasting does to their body, mind, and spirit, which is why God ends the verse by saying, "But that you should observe the fast would be better for you, if only you knew." We then continue on to the next verse, wherein God says, "The month of Ramadan is the one in which the Quran was sent down. A guidance for people and manifestations of the guidance and the standard of right and wrong. So whoever among you has witnessed the month, then let him fast it. But whoever happens to be sick or on a journey, then a number of other days. God wants the easy for you, and he does not want the hard for you, and in hope that you may finish out the number and that you may magnify God for what he has guided you, and that you may show appreciation. In this verse, we are told that the month of Ramadan is the month in which the Quran was sent down to Muhammad the Messenger. Thus, the month of Ramadan became by proxy the month of the Quran. It is the month in which we are to commemorate and celebrate the revelation of the Quran, as in it is a guidance for the people, as well as manifestations of that guidance and the standard of right and wrong. The Quran is to function as the benchmark by which we measure the quality of things, meaning whether something is good or bad. When we are presented with something, we always have to consider whether that something is in line with the teachings and guidelines of the Quran. If it is not in line with the teachings and the guidelines of the Quran, then we are encouraged to stay away from it. When this month comes around, and we witness its arrival, then we are told to fast it according to the statement of the verse, so whoever among you has witnessed the month, then let him fast it. Since the Arabian calendar is a lunar calendar, this would mean that the beginning of the month would be witnessed by the appearance or absence of the crescent, which would signify that a new month has indeed begun. Similarly, this understanding is also confirmed in verse 5 of chapter 10, wherein God says regarding the sun and moon, "He is the one who has made the sun as a shining blaze and the moon as a light, and he has determined for its stages and positions in order that you might know the number of the years, as well as the calculation." God did not create this except with justification. He elaborates the signs for a people who wish to know. Thus, according to this verse, God created the sun and the moon, in particular the moon, in order that people may know the number of years as well as the calculation. This would in turn mean that within the environment in which the Quran was revealed, people used to use a lunar calendar to calculate the number of years, which of course would require them to first know the months. In the statement, "He has determined for its stages and positions," this is a reference to the moon in the verse, rather than the sun, since the attached pronoun of the verb to determine is a masculine pronoun, whereas the word sun in Arabic is feminine. Thus, the determination of the stages and positions of the moon by God enabled people at the time to know the number of years, as well as their calculation, hence why God says in the verse, that he did not create these objects without a justification. Furthermore, we are told in verse 189 of chapter 2, where the prophet is asked about the new moons, that he was supposed to respond, "They are timings for the people and the pilgrimage." Thus, new moons were a way by which people used to time the beginning or ending of the month, particularly the pilgrimage, as this was a very important societal event that would take place 4 times a year in the 4 sacred months, so knowing when these months begun and when they ended was very crucial for the people living at that time in that environment. Now, returning to the subject of Ramadan, the verse informed us that whoever happened to witness the month, then if capable and willing, they were obliged to observe the fast. As for those who are sick or on a journey, then they could fast a number of other days. There are various posited views to what this could mean. One view, which is also the most popular, suggests that someone has to fast the missed days on some other days outside of the month. However, I would contend this view and suggest that this might not be what the verse is actually implying. I believe that the verse is actually saying that whoever happens to be sick or on a journey, then a number of other days within the month itself. So, if you are sick or on a journey during the month of Ramadan, you can just fast the other days on which you will not be sick. Thus, this would mean in my opinion that there is no such thing as making up missed days after the month of Ramadan. If you become sick or on a journey, then you can just fast other days of the month on which you are well. Now, I understand this would come as a massive shock to many people, as it is quite engraved in the psyche of the Muslim community. However, observing the verses, this reading would seem more plausible in terms of these 2 verses and their grammatical structures as well as their choice of words. Hence why the verse follows this statement up with the sentence, "God wants the easy for you, and he does not want the hard for you," meaning that this whole alleviation and exemption is because God wants to make things easy for people and not to make them difficult. This ease and alleviation would enable people to finish out the number, and to magnify God for what He has guided them, and that they may show appreciation. So, one of the questions that one may raise here is, how are they completing the number if they are not fasting the whole month? Well, the answer to this question would be whether the number in reference is referring to the number of the missed days or the remaining number of days in the month. My understanding would of course be that it is referring to the latter, meaning the remaining number of the month, so, in order that they may at least finish out the month. Aside from finishing out the number, the verse also informs us that the alleviation was so that the people could magnify or declare the greatness of God because He had guided them. In this case, magnifying God would mean putting God at the forefront during this month and making God the focal point of the month, commemorating God and praising God, and making it clear that this month is in strict celebration of God for having guided us, as well as showing gratitude to God. As the next verse does not deal with fasting itself, we will be skipping it and going straight to verse 187, which reads, "Intimacy with your women has been made permissible for you on the night of the fast. They are a clothing for you, and you are a clothing for them. God knows very well that you used to betray yourselves, but He was receptive to you and pardoned you. So now, be intimate with them and seek what God has prescribed for you, and eat and drink until the white thread of the morn becomes clear to you from the dark thread. Then complete the fast until the night, but do not have relations with them while you are detained and busy at the community centers. Those are the boundaries of God, so do not come near them." Thus does God make His signs clear for the people, in hope that they may attain self-discipline. In this verse, we are informed that intimacy, any form of intimacy it would seem, was permissible on the night of the fast, indicating that it was impermissible during the day of the fast. Thus, the very first thing that we are introduced to as to what is impermissible while fasting, is the abstinence from sexual intimacy, rather than food or water. We are told that women are a clothing for men and that men are a clothing for women, meaning they function as a source of comfort and tranquility for one another. Then we are informed that there were certain people within the community who used to betray themselves, in that they would swear off intimacy with their women even during the night of the fast, but then would break that vow during the night. So, God informs them that He certainly does know that they used to betray or be treacherous to themselves, but that He had pardoned them for that. This is because God understands the difficulty that would befall man if he were to forbid himself from sexual intimacy with his spouse for a whole month. So, those people who vowed to stay away from their spouses during the entirety of the month but then would later on break that vow, God turned towards them with forgiveness and pardoned them for breaking their vows. And then He informs them, "So now, be intimate with them and seek what God has prescribed for you." Then the verse informs us of what we typically know today about fasting, namely to eat and drink until the white thread of the morn becomes clear to you from the dark thread. Thus, according to this statement, one may eat and drink until the white thread of the morn, meaning when the first light of morning begins to appear and becomes apparent from the darkness of the night. Not when darkness has disappeared in its entirety, rather, when the first light of dawn begins to appear to a point that it is distinguishable from the darkness of the night. One cannot pinpoint exactly what time that is, as sometimes it may differ due to the weather, so it is up to the individual to determine when the first light begins of dawn to be distinguishable from the darkness of the night. Then we are instructed to complete the fast until night. Thus, according to this verse, the fast is to be completed until night, rather than broken at sunset as it is held by the Sunni branch of Islam. Furthermore, we are told, "But do not have relations with them while you are detained at the community centers." The word rendered as community centers is masajid, which is typically rendered as houses of worship or mosques. However, this would be a strange statement in this context. If the word masajid did in fact mean houses of worship or prayer in this context, then it would really call to question the necessity to even mention the impermissibility of engaging in sexual behavior while secluded in such a place. Why would anyone assume that it would be okay to have sexual relations with their spouse while in the houses of worship, particularly a mosque? Perhaps the word, masajid or masjid, refers to something more than what we have come to understand today. I would opt for a translation that would imply more of a center of meeting, for all sorts of activities, a center where people meet and gather to engage in all sorts of activities that have to do with the community, in addition to it being a mere place of worship. Thus, the verse is trying to say that if we, for example, happen to be detained at the community centers due to some pressing matters that need to be resolved, and as a result we cannot return home, then we are not supposed to prioritize sexual intimacy with our spouses over tending to the more pressing issues of the community. The verse then concludes by stating, "Those are the boundaries of God, so do not come near them." Thus does God make his signs clear for the people, in hope that they may attain self-discipline. Meaning that these limits are set by God and should not be transgressed nor even approached. God makes them clear through these verses for the people, in hope that the people may attain self-discipline. We end the verses in the same way as we begun. The purpose of the fast was instituted as a way for people to attain self-discipline, and the methodology by which one goes about observing the fast has been laid out and clarified in these verses, so that people may not claim that they did not know how to attain this self-discipline through fasting. So, to conclude from what we have discussed to this point, fasting was prescribed upon us just as it was prescribed upon those who were before us in order that we may attain self-discipline. Fasting is not an obligation, so anyone who is sick or on a journey does not have to fast. Instead, they may fast a number of other days where they are not sick or not journeying. Those who are capable of fasting but find it difficult and cumbersome, do not have to fast. They can instead feed a poor person or people in accordance with what is within their means. But if they can persist and overcome the difficulty, then that would be better, as fasting brings with it a lot of benefits which the body as well as the mind and the spirit desperately need. The Quran was revealed in the month of Ramadan, and because of that we are supposed to commemorate this month by observing the fast. Those who are sick or on a journey can just fast a number of other days in the month where they are well and not journeying. There is no making up of days after the month has finished. As for those people who can fast but find fasting cumbersome and difficult, as a result they struggle with it, then they may feed a poor person or persons according to their means. During the night of the fast, approaching one's spouse for sexual purposes, as well as eating and drinking, are allowed, but only until the white thread of the dawn is visibly distinguishable from the dark thread of the night. We are then instructed to resume with the fast until nighttime, rather than sundown. Finally, if we happen to be detained at the community centers, and as a result cannot return home, then we are not supposed to prioritize sexual intimacy with our spouses over tending to the more pressing issues of the community. Anyway, that was all I had on this topic. There is of course a lot more that could be said on this topic, however, I did not wish to get into the technical difficulties of the words, so I opted for making the video as simple and as condensed as I could. I hope you were all able to easily follow along. To all those who are going to be fasting in the next few days, may God accept your fast from you, and may you attain all the beauties that fasting has to offer. A blessed Ramadan to you all, and I will hopefully see you all in the next video.